Have you ever wondered what India was like before British rule? For centuries, India was renowned for its exquisite textiles and skilled artisans. But what happened to this vibrant economy? How did one of the world's wealthiest regions become impoverished? Today, we're diving deep into the economic impact of British rule on India, a story of profound transformation and immense hardship. Let's start with the artisans. Imagine a world where Indian cotton and silk textiles were the gold standard, sought after from Europe to East Asia. We're talking about legendary fabrics like Dhaka muslin, so fine it was called woven air. This was the reality, but the Industrial Revolution in Britain changed everything. With machine-made goods flooding the market, Indian artisans, who crafted everything by hand, simply couldn't compete. British policies actively favoured their own industries, imposing heavy duties on Indian textiles in Britain while allowing British goods to enter India with minimal tariffs. This one-sided competition led to what historians call de-industrialization. Millions of weavers, spinners, and other craftsmen lost their livelihoods. Their skills, passed down through generations, became redundant. Prosperous towns and cities that were once centers of production began to decline, forcing these now unemployed artisans to seek work elsewhere, mostly in agriculture, which was already under immense strain. This leads us to the plight of the peasantry. Before the British, the land revenue system, while not perfect, was often flexible. Taxes were typically a share of the actual produce, meaning if the harvest failed, the burden on the farmer was lighter. The British, however, were obsessed with a steady, predictable source of revenue to fund their administration, army, and wars. They introduced rigid land revenue systems like the permanent settlement, the Ryotwari system, and the Mahalwari system. The key change? The tax was now a fixed amount of cash, due on a fixed date, regardless of the harvest. A drought, a flood, it didn't matter. The tax had to be paid. To meet these relentless demands, peasants were forced to borrow from local moneylenders at exorbitant interest rates. A vicious cycle began. One bad harvest could lead to a debt that a family might never escape. Over time, countless peasants lost their land to these moneylenders or the government, becoming landless laborers on the very fields their families had tilled for generations. The countryside was plunged into deep poverty and debt. This also brings us to a major shift in land relations. The British fundamentally altered the concept of land ownership. In many areas, they created a new class of landlords, the Zamindars, who were now considered private owners of the land. Their role was simple: collect revenue from the peasants and pass a fixed share to the British. While this gave the Zamindars immense power, it also made their position precarious. Under systems like the permanent settlement, if they failed to pay the fixed revenue to the state by the sunset on a specific day, their lands were auctioned off. Many of the old, traditional Zamindars, who often had a more paternalistic relationship with their tenants, lost their estates. They were replaced by a new class of absentee landlords, often merchants or moneylenders from the cities, whose only interest was extracting maximum rent, with no concern for the welfare of the peasants or the improvement of the land. This commercialization of land broke the traditional bonds that had connected the people to the soil and to each other. With the peasants impoverished and the new landlords uninterested in long-term investment, what do you think happened to agriculture itself? It stagnated. There was very little money or incentive to improve farming techniques, invest in irrigation, or use better seeds and fertilizers. The government spent a pittance on agricultural development. The focus was on revenue extraction, not production. As the population grew, the pressure on the land increased. Holdings were subdivided into smaller and smaller plots, many too tiny to support a family. This fragmentation, combined with a lack of investment, led to a long-term decline in agricultural productivity. India, a land that had once been self-sufficient in food, became vulnerable to recurrent and devastating famines. The famines of the late 19th century were catastrophic, claiming millions of lives. A tragedy made worse by the fact that the British administration often exported food grains from famine-stricken areas. Now, let's talk about a crucial part of this story: the forced commercialization of agriculture, The British encouraged and sometimes forced farmers to grow cash crops instead of food crops. What are cash crops? These are crops grown for sale in the market rather than for consumption by the farmer, like cotton, indigo, opium, tea, and jute. Why the push for these? Because they were raw materials needed for British industries or were highly profitable exports. For example, the booming textile mills in Manchester needed vast amounts of raw cotton. Indigo was a key dye for the European textile industry. Opium was forcibly cultivated and exported to China in a trade that had devastating consequences there. This shift had several negative effects. Firstly, it reduced the amount of land available for growing food, increasing food insecurity and making famines more likely. Secondly, the peasants who grew these crops were rarely the ones who benefited. They were at the mercy of volatile global market prices, and the profits were mostly captured by merchants, moneylenders, and British trading companies. The farmer was trapped, forced to grow a crop he couldn't eat for a price he couldn't control, to pay a tax he couldn't escape. So, let's put it all together. The destruction of traditional industries pushed millions into agriculture. The new land revenue systems impoverished the peasantry and created a class of absentee landlords. A lack of investment led to agricultural stagnation. And the forced commercialization of agriculture made farmers vulnerable and food scarce. This was the complex web of policies and consequences that systematically drained wealth from India and fueled Britain's industrial might. It wasn't just a simple transfer of money. It was the complete restructuring of an entire economy to serve colonial interests. The thriving, multifaceted Indian economy was transformed into a colonial economy, a supplier of raw materials and a market for British finished goods. The long-term consequences of this economic transformation are still being debated and felt today. Understanding this history is crucial to understanding the economic challenges that post-independence India faced and continues to navigate. It's a sobering look at how economic policies can shape the destinies of millions. If you found this deep dive into India's economic history insightful, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. We have many more stories from the past that shed light on our present. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.